The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, embossed with gold lettering that caught the afternoon light streaming through my kitchen window. Monterey Peninsula Community Foundation Annual Gala, an evening of excellence. I traced the elegant script with my finger, already knowing I would attend alone, as I had for the past 3 years since becoming a foster parent. But something shifted that Tuesday morning in October. Maybe it was the way 8-year-old Isabella looked up from her cereal, her dark eyes holding that familiar wariness, or how 12-year-old Diego had started sketching elaborate gowns in the margins of his homework. Perhaps it was 11-year-old Luna, quietly folding origami cranes at the kitchen table, each one a small prayer for permanence in a world that had taught her that homes were temporary. The children had been with me for 8 months, long enough to know their favorite cereals and bedtime stories, but not long enough for the state to consider permanency. Not long enough for Monterey's elite to see them as anything more than charity cases. I made a decision that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my quiet life in our coastal California town. Maria Santos. My name carries weight in Monterey, though not the kind that opens doors to exclusive galas. As a social worker for the county, I navigate the uncomfortable spaces between Monterey's picture-perfect facade and its hidden struggles. The town markets itself as a tourist paradise, a playground for Silicon Valley's wealthy weekend warriors. But I see the families crammed into converted garages, the children who arrive at school hungry, the parents working 3 jobs to afford rent in a community that has priced out its own workforce. The gala invitation represented everything I usually avoided: a gathering of the town's power brokers, tech entrepreneurs, and trust fund recipients who treated charity work like a competitive sport. But as I watched my foster children navigate another day of temporary existence, something crystallized. Diego, whose artistic talent teachers dismissed because of his address, possessed a creative vision that could rival any gallery artist. Luna collected facts about marine life and could recite the scientific names of every species native to Monterey Bay, but her previous placements had labeled her difficult for her selective mutism. Isabella wrote stories that would make seasoned authors weep, tales of resilience that her young mind shouldn't have needed to conceive. These children deserve to be seen, not hidden away like inconvenient truths. The gala's theme was investing in our future, and I realized the irony was too perfect to ignore. Monterey's future wasn't just the privileged children attending private schools and sailing camps. It was also Diego, Luna, and Isabella, kids who had survived more than most adults, who carried wisdom earned through loss, who understood the value of stability because they had lived without it. I called the foundation's office that afternoon. Patricia Whitman, the event coordinator, answered with her practiced enthusiasm. "I'd like to purchase tickets for 4, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A pause. 4? Are you bringing guests from out of town? My children, I replied, knowing the word would hang in the air, loaded with implications about my marital status, my choices, my fitness for their exclusive event. Oh, another pause, longer this time. Well, the gala is quite formal, and the timing, it runs rather late for little ones. I pressed forward. They're 8, 11, and 12, old enough to appreciate an evening celebrating community investment. What I didn't say was that these children had attended court hearings that determined their futures, had sat through meetings where adults discussed them like case files, had endured photo shoots for adoption websites where they were required to smile despite their circumstances. They could handle a few hours of small talk and overpriced chicken. Patricia's voice took on that particular tone, reserved for people she considered naive. The tickets are quite expensive. $500 each. $2,000. Nearly a month's rent. But I thought of Diego's drawings, Luna's carefully preserved sea glass collection, Isabella's stories written on scraps of paper and hidden under her mattress. They deserved to exist in spaces that weren't defined by their trauma. That's fine, I said. We'll be there. The weeks leading up to the gala became a covert operation. I couldn't afford formal wear for 4 people, so I haunted thrift stores in Santa Cruz, driving 30 minutes each way to avoid the gossip mill that was Monterey's small retail scene. At a consignment shop on Pacific Avenue, I found a navy blue dress that had probably graced some Silicon Valley executive's closet, tags still attached. For Diego, a black suit jacket that needed only minor alterations. Luna's dress was ocean blue, her favorite color, with a full skirt that made her smile for the first time in weeks. Isabella's outfit was burgundy velvet, sophisticated enough to match her old soul personality. The children approached the preparation with varying degrees of enthusiasm and terror. Diego threw himself into research, studying videos of formal events and practicing how to hold silverware. "I don't want to embarrass you," he said one evening, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting an imaginary tie. The weight of his words hit me. At 12, he was already carrying shame about things beyond his control, his background, his circumstances, his worthiness to exist in certain spaces. I knelt beside him, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "You could never embarrass me," I said. "You being there, exactly as you are, is the point." Luna's anxiety manifested differently. She became even quieter, if possible, spending hours arranging and rearranging her sea glass collection, seeking control in the small ritual. I found her one night, long after bedtime, sitting on her bedroom floor with marine biology guides spread around her like a paper fort. "What if I can't talk to anyone?" she whispered. I sat beside her, careful not to disturb her carefully organized displays. "You know more about the ocean than most people will ever learn. If someone asks you a question and you want to answer, you answer. If you don't, you don't. There's no rule that says you have to perform for other people." Isabella's response was the most complex. She threw herself into writing, filling notebook after notebook with stories about children who attended fancy parties and discovered they belonged there all along. But I caught her late one night, standing in front of the hallway mirror in her new dress, tears streaming down her face. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," she said. I joined her at the mirror, both of us reflected in the glass, a makeshift family preparing for an event that might accept or reject us entirely. "We're all playing dress-up," I told her. "The difference is, some people have been playing longer." As the gala approached, I began to hear whispers around town. Monterey's social circles were small and overlapping, and word traveled fast. At the grocery store, conversation stopped when I approached. At the post office, I caught fragments of discussions about appropriateness and knowing one's place. Dr. Charles Pemberton, who served on the hospital board and whose family had lived in Monterey for 4 generations, made his opinion clear during a chance encounter at the farmer's market. His disapproval was wrapped in concern, the way bigotry often disguises itself in coastal communities. "Maria, I heard you're bringing your charges to the gala," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for people he considered misguided. "Are you certain that's wise? These events can be overwhelming for children from difficult backgrounds." The phrase "difficult backgrounds" hung between us like a challenge. I thought of Isabella's poetry, Diego's artwork, Luna's gentle wisdom. Their backgrounds weren't difficult. They were complex, layered, rich with experience that had shaped them into remarkable human beings. "They're my children," I said quietly, "and they deserve to be seen as part of this community's future." Dr. Pemberton's smile was thin, patronizing. Of course. Just, perhaps a family restaurant might be more appropriate for an outing." I left the farmer's market with my purchases and a burning certainty that we were doing the right thing, regardless of the whispers, regardless of the social cost. The Monterey Plaza Hotel had been transformed for the evening, its oceanfront elegance enhanced with white flowers and golden lighting that made the chandeliers sparkle like captured stars. Cars lined the circular drive, Teslas, BMWs, the occasional Porsche that announced its owner's success while maintaining environmental consciousness through luxury. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between a Range Rover and a Lexus, the contrast so stark it felt intentional. Diego noticed immediately. "Our car looks embarrassed," he said, but his tone held humor rather than shame. We walked toward the entrance, for figures in careful formal wear, and I felt the weight of curious stares. The children held themselves with dignity that humbled me, Luna with her marine biology field guide clutched discreetly in her small purse, Diego with his sketchbook tucked into his jacket pocket, Isabella with a notebook of her stories, just in case. They had learned to carry their passions with them, knowing that home was temporary but interests were portable. The hotel's lobby buzzed with pre-dinner cocktails and the kind of laughter that comes from shared assumptions about belonging. I recognized faces from around town, Patricia Whitman holding court near the registration table, Dr. Pemberton discussing something animated with Judge Catherine Martinez, City Councilman Antonio Rodriguez networking with practiced efficiency. We approached the registration table, and I watched Patricia's expression cycle through surprise, discomfort, and professional courtesy. Her smile was bright and brittle. "Maria, you look lovely. And these must be your children." The pause before children was slight but noticeable. Luna moved closer to my side, her hand finding mine. Diego straightened his shoulders, and Isabella lifted her chin with the defiance of someone who had learned to defend her right to exist in spaces that questioned her presence. "This is Diego, Luna, and Isabella," I said, my voice warm with genuine pride. "They're excited to be here." Patricia handed us our table assignment, Table 12, toward the back of the ballroom, far from the head table where Mayor Rebecca Chin would sit with the evening's honorees. The placement wasn't accidental. We were being tolerated, not welcomed. The ballroom was spectacular, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Monterey Bay and the distant Santa Lucia Mountains. Round tables were draped in white linens, each centerpiece a small garden of local succulents and wildflowers. The children took it in with wide eyes, processing the luxury but not intimidated by it. Our table companions were revealed as we found our seats: Tom and Jennifer Parker, who owned a successful software company, Dr. and Mrs. Michael Tanaka, both physicians at the Peninsula Medical Center, and Catherine Walsh, who managed the area's largest real estate firm. The introductions were polite but strained. I could feel the undercurrent of curiosity and judgment as I explained that Diego, Luna, and Isabella were my foster children. The adult smiles became more cautious, their questions more careful. Jennifer Parker leaned forward with the kind of interest that felt invasive. "How wonderful that you're fostering. That must be so challenging. Are they siblings?" Before I could respond, Diego spoke up with quiet dignity. "We're not related by blood, but we're family now." The simplicity of his statement seemed to catch the adults off guard. They had expected either grateful subservience or behavioral problems, not this matter-of-fact confidence from a 12-year-old who understood family in ways that transcended biology. As dinner was served, conversations flowed around us but rarely included us. The children ate with perfect manners. They had learned early that behavior was constantly scrutinized, that any mistake would reflect not just on them but on their worthiness to receive care. During the salad course, Dr. Michael Tanaka asked Luna about school, probably expecting typical child chatter. Instead, she began quietly describing the migration patterns of gray whales, her selective mutism disappearing when she discussed something she was passionate about. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her observations sophisticated, and by the end of her explanation, the entire table was listening. "That's quite impressive," Catherine Walsh said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Where did you learn all that?" Luna's voice became smaller, more uncertain. "Books. And watching. I like to watch the water." "She has an entire collection," Isabella added, protective instincts kicking in. "She knows everything about Monterey Bay." The conversation continued, and I watched the adults at our table begin to see my children as individuals rather than statistics. Diego discussed his artwork, showing sketches he had made of the hotel's architecture. Isabella shared her interest in writing, mentioning that she was working on a story about children who felt invisible. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that the evening might exceed my modest expectations. The trouble began during the silent auction preview. Guests moved between displays of donated items, weekend getaways to Napa, restaurant gift certificates, artwork by local artists. I stayed close to the children, aware that we were being watched, aware that any perceived misstep would be magnified. Diego had stopped in front of a display featuring art supplies, professional-grade paints, brushes, and canvases donated by the local art store. His expression was one of longing so intense it was painful to witness. "Those brushes are what real artists use," he said quietly, his voice holding the weight of dreams that felt impossible. A woman I recognized but couldn't name overheard and laughed, not maliciously but with the casual cruelty of someone unaware of their privilege. "Well, maybe if you work really hard in school, someday you'll be able to afford things like that." Diego's face closed off, his expression returning to the careful neutrality he wore when the world reminded him of his place. But Isabella, barely 8 years old, stepped forward with fierce protectiveness. "He's already a real artist," she said, her voice carrying across the nearby conversations. "He draws better than anyone in our school. Better than anyone I've ever seen." The woman looked embarrassed, perhaps realizing the implications of her casual dismissal. But the damage was done. I saw Diego withdraw into himself, saw Luna move closer to my side, saw Isabella's jaw set with the anger of a child who had learned too early that the world was unfair. We returned to our table for the main program, but the evening's tone had shifted. I felt more acutely aware of the glances, the whispered conversations, the way space seemed to open around us as if we carried some contagious uncertainty about belonging. Mayor Linda Foster took the stage to begin the evening's formal program. She was in her second term, a popular leader who had successfully balanced Monterey's growth with its environmental character. Her speech focused on community investment, on the importance of supporting all of Monterey's children. The irony wasn't lost on me as she spoke about opportunity and inclusion while my foster children sat at the back of the room, tolerated but not truly welcomed. Tonight, we celebrate not just what Monterey is, but what it can become, Mayor Foster said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. Every child in our community deserves the chance to thrive, to discover their potential, to know that they are valued. Polite applause filled the room, but I noticed how few people made eye contact with our table during the mayor's words about valuing all children. The program continued with awards and recognition for community volunteers. Tech leaders were honored for their charitable contributions. Families who had donated significant amounts to various causes were acknowledged with gratitude and applause. Then came the portion of the evening I hadn't anticipated, a request for testimonials from community members about the impact of local charitable work. Several people stepped forward to share stories. A local teacher talked about supplies donated to her classroom. A nonprofit director discussed funding for youth programs. Each story was met with warm applause and nodding heads. Something compelled me to stand. I'm not sure what drove the decision, perhaps the weight of the evening's subtle rejections, perhaps the sight of my children sitting straighter in their chairs despite the discomfort, perhaps Mayor Chin's words about valuing all children still echoing in the ballroom. I walked to the microphone, aware that conversations were stopping, that attention was focusing on our back table, on the social worker who had brought foster children to their exclusive event. Good evening, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. My name is Maria Santos, and I work for Monterey County as a social worker. A ripple of recognition moved through the room. I saw Dr. Pemberton lean forward, saw Patricia Whitman's expression tighten, saw other faces I recognized from around town. I want to tell you about 3 children who represent the best of what Monterey can be, I continued. Diego, who is 12, creates art that captures the beauty of our coastline with a sophistication that amazes everyone who sees it. Luna, who is 11, knows more about our marine ecosystem than most biology students, and her passion for ocean life has taught me to see our environment through new eyes. Isabella, who is 8, writes stories that explore themes of resilience and hope with a wisdom that humbles me. I paused, looking out at the faces in the ballroom. Some were attentive, others uncomfortable, a few openly skeptical. These children are part of Monterey's future, I said. They're not charity cases or problems to be solved. They're remarkable human beings who happen to be in foster care, and they deserve to be seen and valued for who they are, not defined by their circumstances. The silence that followed felt eternal. I had crossed a line, violated the unspoken rules of polite society by forcing them to confront the children they preferred to keep invisible. Then, unexpectedly, applause began. Not the polite, measured applause of social obligation, but something warmer, more genuine. I saw tears in some eyes, nods of recognition, smiles that reached beyond mere courtesy. But I also saw other faces, Dr. Pemberton's tight disapproval, Patricia Whitman's obvious discomfort, several couples who seemed offended by the implication that their charity work might be missing something essential. I returned to our table, my heart racing, unsure whether I had helped my children or made their lives more difficult. The evening progressed with dessert and more silent auction bidding, but I felt the shift in energy around our table. Some people made an effort to engage more genuinely with Diego, Luna, and Isabella. Others maintained their distance, as if my speech had confirmed their suspicions about our inappropriateness. Then Mayor Foster approached our table. Linda Foster was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She had built her political career on accessibility and genuine concern for all of Monterey's residents, not just the wealthy ones who dominated events like this. Miss Santos, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for those words. They needed to be said. I stood to shake her hand, surprised by her warmth, by the fact that she had sought us out rather than simply acknowledging my speech from afar. Mayor Foster, I'd like you to meet my children, I said, the words feeling more natural each time I spoke them. Diego, Luna, and Isabella. What happened next was one of those moments that shifts the entire trajectory of an evening. Mayor Foster didn't offer the children the patronizing attention that adults often give to young people they consider unfortunate. Instead, she pulled up an empty chair and sat down at our table, treating them as equals worthy of genuine conversation. She asked Diego about his art, and when he shyly showed her some sketches from his notebook, she studied them with real attention. These are extraordinary, she said. Have you considered entering the Young Artists exhibition at the Pacific Grove Art Center? Diego's eyes widened. I didn't know there was one. There is, and these pieces would be perfect. Would you be interested if I made some introductions? She turned to Luna, asking about her marine knowledge. When Luna began describing the different species she had observed in Monterey Bay, Mayor Chin listened with genuine fascination. You know, the city is working on kelp forest restoration projects. We could use a consultant with your expertise. For Isabella, she had questions about her writing. What kinds of stories do you write? Stories about kids like us, Isabella replied. Kids who don't think they belong anywhere but find out they do. Mayor Foster nodded thoughtfully. Those sound like important stories. Stories that help people understand experiences they might not have had themselves. As their conversation continued, I became aware that the entire ballroom was watching, not with the subtle surveillance we had experienced earlier, but with open curiosity about why their mayor was spending so much time at the table in the back, why she seemed so engaged with the foster children who had been charity cases just an hour before. Then Mayor Foster stood, but instead of returning to the head table, she moved to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment more. The room quieted, expecting perhaps closing remarks or final thanks to the evening's sponsors. This evening has reminded me why I love Monterey, she began. Not just for its natural beauty or its economic opportunities, but for moments like this, when we're reminded that our community's strength comes from recognizing and nurturing all of our citizens. She gestured toward our table. I've just had the privilege of meeting 3 remarkable young people who represent exactly the kind of future we should be investing in. Diego, Luna, and Isabella have talents and perspectives that enrich our entire community. The mayor paused, her expression becoming more serious. But I have to be honest with you. As I look around this room tonight, I see mostly faces that look like mine. I see mostly people who have been fortunate in their circumstances. And while there's nothing wrong with success, there is something wrong when our vision of community investment excludes the children who most need our support. A murmur ran through the ballroom. This wasn't the comfortable conclusion to a charity event that the audience expected. Maria Santos brought her foster children here tonight not to make us uncomfortable, but to remind us that these kids are part of our community too. They're not problems to be solved from a distance, but young people with gifts to offer, with perspectives that can teach us, with potential that deserves the same investment we give to our own biological children. Mayor Foster's voice grew stronger, more passionate. I'm proposing that we expand our definition of community investment. I'm proposing that we create mentorship programs, scholarship funds, and opportunities specifically designed to support children in foster care. I'm proposing that we stop treating foster families like charity cases and start treating them like what they are, families. The silence that followed was different from the one after my speech. This wasn't uncertainty, it was consideration. When applause began, it was sustained and heartfelt. But as I looked around the room, I also saw faces that held different expressions. Dr. Pemberton looked positively grim. Several couples near the front tables seemed offended by the mayor's implication that their current charitable efforts were insufficient. Patricia Whitman appeared to be calculating the political implications of the evening's unexpected turn. Mayor Foster returned to our table as the formal program concluded and people began to mingle for final conversations. Thank you, she said to me quietly. This community needed to have this conversation. Then she turned to the children. I meant what I said about those opportunities. Maria has my contact information. Let's make sure these ideas turn into action. As we prepared to leave, several people approached our table. Some offered genuine encouragement and interest in connecting with the children. Others seemed motivated by the mayor's endorsement, their attention now politically expedient rather than authentically inspired. But Diego, Luna, and Isabella handled it all with grace, accepting compliments without either arrogance or excessive gratitude, answering questions with the honesty that had characterized their entire evening. The car ride home was quiet, all of us processing the evening's unexpected turns. Diego sketched by the light of his phone, capturing images from the ballroom while they were still fresh. Luna organized the business cards and contact information that people had pressed into her hands. Isabella stared out the window at Monterey Bay, its surface reflecting the lights from Cannery Row. That was different than I expected, Isabella said finally. Different how? I asked. She considered the question with her usual seriousness. I thought they would either love us or hate us. I didn't expect confusion. Her observation was astute. The evening had revealed the complexity of small-town dynamics, the way good intentions could coexist with unconscious bias, the way change made people uncomfortable even when they intellectually supported it. At home, as the children changed out of their formal clothes and prepared for bed, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. We had done something important, something that might create opportunities for other foster families, something that had forced our community to examine its assumptions. But I also felt the weight of what we had potentially set in motion. Small towns have long memories, and challenging the social order can have consequences that extend far beyond a single evening. Over the following days, those consequences began to manifest. My phone rang constantly, reporters from regional newspapers wanting to write about the foster family Gala story, nonprofit organizations interested in partnering on new programs, and community members with opinions ranging from supportive to hostile. More concerning were the formal inquiries that began to arrive. The State Child Welfare Office received an anonymous complaint about my judgment in bringing foster children to an inappropriate adult event. My supervisor called to discuss boundary issues and professional conduct concerns. Dr. Pemberton, who served on several boards that influenced funding for social services, made his disapproval known through official channels. He questioned whether someone who sought publicity for foster children was prioritizing their welfare or her own agenda. The children felt the shift too. Diego came home from school with a split lip, reluctant to explain what had happened, but finally admitting that some classmates had mocked him for playing dress-up with rich people. Luna's teacher reported that she had returned to complete silence, even in situations where she had been making progress with communication. Isabella's stories became darker, filled with characters who were punished for reaching beyond their designated places. I realized that our moment of triumph at the gala had come with a cost that the children were now paying. 3 weeks after the gala, Patricia Whitman called with news that felt like vindication and threat simultaneously. The Monterey Peninsula Community Foundation had decided to establish a scholarship fund specifically for children in foster care, inspired by the mayor's speech and the community conversation that had followed. "We'd like to name it after you," Patricia said, her voice carrying a complex mixture of genuine respect and something else I couldn't identify. The Maria Santos Foster Youth Scholarship Fund. The honor was significant, potentially life-changing for future foster children in our community. But something in Patricia's tone made me uneasy. "We'll need to do a formal announcement," she continued. "Press conference, interviews. You and the children would be the faces of the program." The children. Always the children, their stories commodified, their privacy sacrificed for the greater good of community awareness and charitable giving. That night, as I helped Luna organize her sea glass collection, a ritual that brought her comfort during stressful times, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Maria, are we going to be famous?" The way she said it, with worry rather than excitement, made me realize that I had been seeing the situation through adult eyes, focused on systemic change and community impact, while the children were experiencing something much more personal and potentially damaging. "Do you want to be famous?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "I just want to be normal. I want to belong somewhere without everyone watching to see if I deserve it." Her words hit me like a physical blow. In my effort to advocate for foster children's visibility and worth, I had made my own children into symbols, specimens to be examined and evaluated by a community that was still deciding whether they were worthy of genuine acceptance. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The scholarship announcement was scheduled for a Friday morning at the community center, with local media invited and community leaders expected to attend. Mayor Chin would present the program, and I was scheduled to speak about the importance of supporting foster youth. But Thursday evening, everything changed. My supervisor, Carmen Delgado, called just as we were finishing dinner. Her voice carried the formal tone reserved for difficult conversations. "Maria, we need to talk. Can you come in early tomorrow morning?" The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m., an hour before the scholarship announcement. I arranged for the children to stay with my neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, telling them I had an early work meeting but not wanting to worry them with details I didn't yet understand. Carmen's office felt smaller than usual, cramped with the weight of unspoken concerns. She sat behind her desk with a file folder open in front of her, her expression carefully neutral. "We've received several complaints about your conduct regarding your foster placement," she began, using the clinical language that transformed children into case files. "Questions have been raised about your judgment, your motivations, and your ability to maintain appropriate boundaries." The words felt surreal, disconnected from the reality of our lives. "What specific complaints?" Carmen consulted her file. Anonymous reports suggesting that you're using the children for personal publicity. Concerns about exposing them to adult situations that may not be in their best interests. Questions about whether you're prioritizing advocacy over the children's need for stability and privacy. Each accusation felt like a physical blow. These children have thrived in my care. They're doing well in school, they're healthy, they're happy. How is advocating for foster children's inclusion in community life somehow harmful? It's not about the advocacy, Carmen said carefully. It's about the methods. The Gala incident has drawn significant attention, and not all of it is positive. We have to consider whether this level of public scrutiny is beneficial for children who have already experienced trauma and instability. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise what was happening. The same system that had placed Diego, Luna, and Isabella in my care was now questioning that placement because I had refused to keep them invisible. There's more, Carmen continued. Dr. Pemberton has formally requested a review of your case. He's citing concerns about your professional judgment and its impact on your ability to provide appropriate care. Dr. Pemberton, the man who had questioned our presence at the gala, who had made his disapproval clear, who now had the power to destroy our family because I had challenged Monterey's comfortable assumptions about charity and worth. What does this mean for the children? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be devastating. They'll need to be moved to temporary placement while the review is conducted. It's standard procedure when questions are raised about a foster home. The room spun around me. Temporary placement. The clinical term for ripping children away from the only stable home they had known, for undoing months of careful trust building, for proving to them once again that love and security were conditional and temporary. When? I whispered. Today. The social workers will arrive this afternoon to facilitate the transition. I thought of Diego's art supplies organized carefully in his bedroom, of Luna's sea glass collection arranged with scientific precision, of Isabella's notebooks filled with stories about finding home. I thought of bedtime routines and morning hugs, of homework help and inside jokes, of the thousand small moments that had woven us together into something that felt like forever. You can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. They've been through enough disruption. They're finally stable, finally trusting. You're going to destroy that because some powerful people in town don't like being challenged. Carmen's expression remained carefully professional, but I caught a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or recognition of the injustice she was required to enforce. I'm sorry, Maria. The decision has been made at a level above mine. The children will be placed with experienced emergency foster parents while the review is conducted. Emergency foster parents. Strangers who would try to comfort children who had been torn away from their home, who would attempt to provide stability to kids who were learning once again that stability was an illusion. I left Carmen's office in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications. The scholarship announcement would go on without us. Mayor Chen would speak about supporting foster youth while the very system designed to protect them was destroying a family because it had become inconvenient, because it had forced uncomfortable conversations about inclusion and worth. I drove home slowly, trying to figure out how to explain to 3 children that the adults who were supposed to protect them had decided to destroy their family instead. How do you tell an 8-year-old that the home she had finally begun to trust was being taken away? How do you explain to a 12-year-old artist that his dreams of belonging somewhere permanent were being shattered by the same people who had applauded his talent just weeks before? Mrs. Anderson met me at the door, her expression concerned. Maria, dear, you look awful. What's wrong? I couldn't speak. The words felt too large, too terrible to release into the world where they would become real. The children were in the living room, Diego working on homework at the coffee table, Luna reading about whale migration patterns, Isabella writing in one of her notebooks. They looked up when I entered, and I saw immediate recognition in their eyes. They had learned to read the expressions of adults whose decisions controlled their lives. What's happening? Isabella asked, her voice small but direct. I sat down on the couch, and they gathered around me instinctively, these children who had learned to comfort adults bearing bad news about their futures. There's going to be a change, I began, the euphemism feeling like betrayal even as I spoke it. Some people have raised concerns about our family, about whether it's best for you to stay here right now. Diego's face went completely blank, the expression he wore when he was protecting himself from hope that might be crushed. Luna moved closer to my side, her hand finding mine. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. They're taking us away. It wasn't a question. These children understood the system better than most adults, understood that their lives could be upended by decisions made in offices by people who had never seen them laugh or cry or dream. It's temporary, I said, hating the lie even as I spoke it, hating the way temporary had become meaningless in their lives, a word adults used to make devastating changes seem less cruel. Because of the gala, Diego said quietly. Because we went where we weren't supposed to be. The accusation in his voice was devastating, not because it was directed at me, but because it was accurate. Our attempt to claim space in Monterrey's elite circles had triggered a backlash that was now destroying the very thing I had tried to protect, their sense of belonging and security. No, I said firmly, pulling all 3 children closer. This is happening because some adults are more comfortable when foster children stay invisible. This is happening because we challenged people who prefer their charity work to be convenient and distant. Luna spoke for the first time, her voice barely audible. Where will we go? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was consuming everything we had built together. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like abandonment, didn't have words that could make this betrayal feel like anything other than what it was, punishment for daring to exist fully in a world that preferred us diminished. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm going to fight this. I'm going to fight for us. Diego looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, that had learned not to trust promises from adults who meant well but lacked power. What if you can't win? The question pierced through every comfortable lie I might have told, every false reassurance I might have offered. What if I couldn't win? What if Dr. Pemberton's influence and Monterrey's social hierarchy were stronger than justice, stronger than love, stronger than the bonds we had forged through months of shared meals and bedtime stories and quiet moments of trust? Then I'll keep fighting until I do, I said, knowing the words sounded hollow but needing to speak them anyway, needing to offer something that resembled hope even as our world crumbled around us. The social workers arrived at 2 o'clock, their practiced efficiency a cruel contrast to the devastation they were orchestrating. They were kind but clinical, understanding but unmovable, sympathetic but bound by procedures that reduced family destruction to paperwork and protocols. I watched Diego pack his art supplies with careful precision, each brush and pencil wrapped individually as if he were preparing for a journey rather than an exile. Luna folded her marine biology field guides into a small suitcase, her sea glass collection too fragile to transport, left behind like everything else that had made this place home. Isabella gathered her notebooks, her stories about children finding where they belonged now bitter prophecies of displacement. They hugged me goodbye with the restraint of children who had learned that emotional displays made transitions harder for everyone involved. Professional witnesses documented our separation with forms and signatures, transforming love into legal technicalities, family into case management. I stood in the driveway as they drove away, my children's faces pressed against the rear window, growing smaller until they disappeared entirely. The review process was designed to be thorough and objective, but I soon discovered that objectivity was a luxury available only to those without power to lose. Dr. Pemberton's complaints had initiated a cascade of scrutiny that examined every aspect of my life, my home, my relationship with the children, my professional conduct. Investigators interviewed neighbors, teachers, coworkers, anyone who had observed our family dynamics. They analyzed my financial records, questioned my motivations for fostering, evaluated my mental health and emotional stability. They examined the children's school records, medical files, therapy notes, creating a clinical portrait of lives that had been rich with laughter and mundane struggles and quiet moments of connection. Mayor Foster called me 3 days after the children were removed, her voice tight with frustration and political calculation. Maria, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that speaking at the gala would trigger this kind of backlash. Her apology felt genuine but inadequate, like expressing regret for a house fire while holding the matches. The scholarship announcement went ahead as planned, she continued. The community response has been overwhelmingly positive. People are asking about Diego, Luna, and Isabella, wanting to know how they can help. The irony was suffocating. Monterrey's citizens were ready to support foster children in the abstract, to write checks and attend fundraisers and feel good about their charitable impulses, but the actual foster children, the ones with names and faces and talents and dreams, had been disappeared from their homes because their visibility had become inconvenient. Where are they? I asked. I can't share that information. You know I can't. I did know. The same privacy laws designed to protect children were now being used to prevent me from knowing whether Diego was still drawing, whether Luna was talking, whether Isabella was still writing stories about belonging. My lawyer, Sofia Hernandez, reviewed the case files with the grim efficiency of someone who had seen the system's capacity for cruelty disguised as protection. She was a family law specialist who had built her practice defending the rights of parents and children caught in bureaucratic machinery that often prioritized compliance over human welfare. The complaints are vague but comprehensive, she explained during our first meeting. They question your judgment, your motivations, your ability to maintain appropriate boundaries. Dr. Pemberton has significant influence with the review board, and he's clearly orchestrating a campaign to have the children permanently removed from your care. Based on what evidence? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Based on the appearance of poor judgment. The system doesn't require proof of actual harm, only concern about potential risk. Your decision to bring the children to the gala is being characterized as attention-seeking behavior that prioritized your personal agenda over their welfare. Sophia spread the files across her desk, documents that reduced our family to bullet points and recommendations. They're arguing that foster children need stability and privacy, not public exposure that makes them targets for scrutiny and potential backlash. The irony being that the scrutiny and backlash are coming from the system itself, I said. That's not how they see it. They see a foster parent who made a decision that resulted in negative consequences for the children, regardless of the righteousness of the underlying cause. I thought about Diego's split lip, about Luna's return to silence, about Isabella's increasingly dark stories. The children had indeed experienced negative consequences, but not because I had brought them to the gala. The consequences had come from a community that punished visibility, from adults who preferred their charity work to remain comfortable and distant, from a system that prioritized compliance over justice. What are our chances? I asked. Sophia's expression was carefully neutral. The face lawyers wear when they're about to deliver news that will reshape your understanding of how the world works. Dr. Pemberton has connections throughout the state child welfare system. He's positioning this case as an example of why foster parents need better oversight, why advocacy shouldn't supersede child welfare, why the system needs to protect children from well-meaning adults who lack proper judgment. She paused, consulting her notes. He's also suggesting that your background as a social worker should have made you more aware of appropriate boundaries, that your professional training makes your poor judgment more concerning, not less. My expertise was being used against me, my education and experience reframed as evidence of my unfitness rather than qualifications for care. The same knowledge that had helped me understand Diego's need for artistic expression, Luna's communication patterns, and Isabella's emotional resilience was now being characterized as manipulation rather than competent parenting. There's something else, Sophia continued. The emergency foster family has reported that the children are having difficulty adjusting. Diego has stopped speaking almost entirely. Luna won't eat consistently. Isabella has been having nightmares. The information hit me like physical blows. My children were suffering, traumatized by separation from the first stable home they had known, and their trauma was being used as evidence that their original placement had been problematic rather than proof that removing them had been devastating. 2 weeks into the investigation, I received a call that changed everything I thought I understood about our situation. The voice was unfamiliar, cautious, belonging to someone who had clearly wrestled with the decision to make contact. Miss Santos. This is Marcus Whitman. I'm Patricia's husband. I recognized the name. Patricia Whitman had coordinated the gala, had been uncomfortable with our presence from the beginning, had maintained her professional courtesy while making her disapproval clear. I need to talk with you, Marcus continued. There are things about this situation that you need to know, things that go beyond what's been made public. We met at a coffee shop in Carmel, far enough from Monterey to avoid curious eyes, but close enough for a conversation that Marcus clearly considered risky. He was a thin man in his 50s, with the careful posture of someone who had spent years managing other people's expectations. Patricia doesn't know I'm here, he began immediately. She would be furious if she knew, but I can't watch this anymore without saying something. He stirred his coffee unnecessarily, gathering courage for whatever he had come to reveal. Dr. Pemberton approached the foundation board 3 days after the gala. He said that allowing foster children at community events was setting a dangerous precedent, that it would encourage other foster families to seek attention, that it would transform charity work into political theater. Marcus's words confirmed what I had suspected but hadn't wanted to believe, that the investigation into my fitness as a foster parent had been orchestrated not by concerns for the children's welfare, but by powerful community members who felt their comfortable assumptions had been challenged. He convinced the board that your speech was inappropriate, that bringing the children was a publicity stunt designed to advance your personal agenda, Marcus continued. He said that true advocates for foster children would protect their privacy, not expose them to public scrutiny. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Dr. Pemberton had reframed our family's visibility as exploitation, had transformed the children's presence at a community event into evidence of my unfitness, had convinced influential people that protecting foster children meant keeping them invisible. But that's not why I'm here, Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. There's something else, something that makes this whole situation even more disturbing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table toward me. Patricia keeps detailed records of foundation activities. This is from last year's Gala Planning Committee. I unfolded the paper to find meeting minutes from the previous year's event planning. The discussion topics seemed routine until I reached a section marked Attendance Policy Review. Motion by Dr. Pemberton. Foundation events should maintain appropriate atmosphere for donors and community leaders. Suggest policy limiting attendance to adults and accompanied minor children of current members. Seconded by Judge Martinez. Motion approved. The policy had been put in place specifically to prevent families like mine from attending. Our presence at this year's gala hadn't just been uncomfortable for the organizers. It had been a direct violation of rules they had established to keep people like us away. They've been planning this for months, Marcus said quietly. The policy, the complaints, the investigation. Your decision to bring the children gave them the opportunity they needed to remove what they saw as a problem family. I stared at the document, understanding finally that our family had never been fighting for inclusion. We had been walking into a trap that had been carefully constructed to ensure our exclusion. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Marcus's expression was pained, carrying the weight of complicity he could no longer bear. Because I have grandchildren. Because I can't imagine them being torn away from their family because some adults decided they didn't belong. Because this isn't about child welfare. This is about power and control and keeping certain people in their place. He stood to leave, then turned back one final time. The emergency foster family, their Dr. Pemberton's nephew and his wife. The children aren't being cared for by strangers. They're being held by people who are loyal to the man who orchestrated their removal. The revelation about Dr. Pemberton's nephew changed everything and nothing. My children were being cared for by family members of the man who had destroyed our home, but proving bias in the system would require resources and influence I didn't possess. The same power structures that had enabled their removal would protect the process from scrutiny. Sophia Hernandez reviewed Marcus Whitman's evidence with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had suspected corruption but lacked proof. This gives us grounds for appeal, but it doesn't guarantee success. The system is designed to protect itself, and challenging powerful people like Dr. Pemberton requires more than documentation of bias. She was right, of course. Fighting the system meant confronting not just individual actors, but the entire network of relationships and assumptions that govern child welfare decisions in small coastal communities. Dr. Pemberton's influence extended beyond the hospital board to county commissioners, state welfare administrators, and family court judges who socialized together and shared common perspectives about appropriate family structures. But the evidence also revealed something more disturbing: the systematic nature of exclusion in our community. The attendance policy, the orchestrated complaints, the placement with Dr. Pemberton's family, these weren't random events but coordinated actions designed to eliminate a family that had challenged Monterey's comfortable social hierarchy. I spent sleepless nights imagining Diego in a bedroom that wasn't his, surrounded by artwork he couldn't touch, his creative spirit slowly suffocating under the weight of displacement. I pictured Luna trying to explain marine ecosystems to adults who saw her knowledge as oddity rather than brilliance, her voice disappearing again into protective silence. I saw Isabella writing stories about children who learned that homes were temporary and love was conditional, her young wisdom turned bitter by betrayal. 3 weeks after their removal, I received permission for a supervised visit. The meeting was scheduled at the county office, in a sterile room designed for family contact under official observation. A social worker would monitor our interaction, documenting emotional responses and recording conversations for later analysis. When the children entered the room, I barely recognized them. Diego had lost weight, his artistic energy replaced by listless compliance. Luna moved with the careful steps of someone trying to remain invisible, her marine biology field guide clutched against her chest like armor. Isabella's eyes held a flatness that terrified me, the light of imagination dimmed by the understanding that adults could not be trusted to protect what mattered most. They hugged me with desperate restraint, aware that their reactions were being evaluated, that expressions of too much or too little attachment could be used as evidence in decisions about their future. We sat in plastic chairs arranged in an awkward circle, struggling to have a natural conversation under circumstances designed to feel artificial and monitored. "How are you doing?" I asked, the question inadequate but necessary. "Fine," Diego replied automatically, the response of a child who had learned that honesty about suffering was dangerous. "Are you still drawing?" A flicker of something crossed his face, pain, loss, resignation. "They don't have supplies for that." The casual destruction of his passion felt intentional, a systematic dismantling of the interests and activities that had defined his identity in our home. Art supplies weren't expensive or difficult to obtain, but they weren't available because nurturing his creativity wasn't a priority for people who saw him as a temporary responsibility rather than a beloved child. Luna spoke quietly about the house where they were staying, describing a tidy suburban home with rules about noise levels and schedules that left little room for the interests that had brought her joy. Her sea glass collection remained in my house, too fragile to transport, too specific to recreate, effectively abandoned like everything else that had made her feel valued and understood. Isabella had stopped writing, she told me. When I asked why, she shrugged with the resigned wisdom of an 8-year-old who had learned that hope was dangerous. "There's no point," she said. "Stories about belonging don't come true." The supervised visit lasted 1 hour, monitored and documented, transformed into evidence for a process that would determine whether we would ever be allowed to be a family again. As I watched them leave, escorted back to a placement that was slowly erasing their personalities and dreams, I understood that the investigation was designed not to determine my fitness as a parent, but to provide legal justification for a decision that had already been made. The formal hearing was scheduled for a cold December morning, 6 weeks after the children had been removed from my care. Sofia Hernandez had prepared our case meticulously, documenting the bias in the complaint process, the conflicts of interest in the placement decision, and the systematic nature of exclusion that had preceded our family's destruction. But as we entered the hearing room, I realized that preparation and evidence would be insufficient against a system designed to protect its own assumptions and power structures. Judge Catherine Martinez presided over the proceedings, the same woman who had attended the gala, who had witnessed my speech about valuing all children, who had seconded Dr. Pemberton's motion to exclude families like mine from community events. Her presence on the bench was the final confirmation that fairness had never been possible in this process. Dr. Pemberton testified about his concerns for the children's welfare, speaking with the authority of medical expertise and community standing. He described my decision to bring the children to the gala as evidence of poor judgment, my advocacy efforts as attention-seeking behavior that prioritized personal agenda over child welfare. His testimony was clinical, devastating, and completely disconnected from the reality of our family life. He spoke about trauma, instability, and appropriate boundaries while systematically destroying the most stable, nurturing environment Diego, Luna, and Isabella had ever known. The emergency foster parents, Dr. Pemberton's nephew and his wife, testified about the children's difficulty adjusting, their behavioral challenges, their apparent anxiety about their previous placement. They described Diego's withdrawal, Luna's selective mutism, Isabella's sleep disturbances as evidence that my care had been problematic rather than proof that separation had been traumatic. When Sofia Hernandez cross-examined them about their relationship to Dr. Pemberton, about the pre-existing attendance policy that had excluded foster families, about the orchestrated nature of the complaints, Judge Martinez sustained objections that prevented the most damaging evidence from being fully explored. The system was protecting itself with practiced efficiency, using procedures and protocols to prevent examination of the power structures and biases that govern child welfare decisions in our small coastal community. When I was called to testify, I spoke about Diego's artistic growth, about Luna's expanding communication, about Isabella's developing confidence and sense of security. I described bedtime routines and homework help, inside jokes and quiet moments of connection, the 1,000 small interactions that had woven us together into something that felt like forever. But my words seemed to evaporate in the sterile air of the hearing room, transformed into sentimentality rather than evidence, dismissed as the predictable protest of someone whose fitness was being questioned. Judge Martinez's decision was delivered with the formal language of legal authority, wrapped in concerns about child welfare and stability that disguised the true nature of what was happening. The children would remain in their current placement while I underwent additional evaluation and training. Reunification would be contingent on my demonstrating improved judgment and appropriate boundaries. Terms so vague they could mean anything or nothing. Criteria that could be endlessly modified to prevent the outcome we all knew would never be allowed. Diego, Luna, and Isabella were not present for the decision that would determine their futures. They were in school, probably unaware that adults in a courthouse were formally destroying their family, legally sanctioning the separation that had already torn apart everything they had learned to trust. As I left the courthouse, Sofia Hernandez tried to offer comfort about appeals and alternative strategies, but we both understood that the system had achieved its intended outcome. A foster family that had challenged social assumptions had been eliminated, and 3 children who had dared to exist fully in spaces that preferred them invisible had been returned to appropriate obscurity. 6 months have passed since the hearing that formally ended our family. I write these words in the same kitchen where I once helped with homework and listened to stories about marine life and dreams about art supplies. The house feels different now, larger and emptier, filled with absence that echoes in every room. Diego is 14 now, still in the same placement, no longer drawing according to the social worker reports I'm allowed to receive. His artistic talent, which had once seemed destined for recognition and cultivation, has been systematically discouraged in a home that values compliance over creativity. Luna turned 13 last month. I don't know if she celebrated, don't know if anyone remembered her passion for marine biology or her encyclopedic knowledge of Monterey Bay wildlife. The selective mutism that had been improving in our home has returned completely, according to clinical reports that reduce her rich inner world to behavioral observations and treatment recommendations. Isabella is 10 now, old enough to understand fully what was done to our family and why. She has stopped writing stories, stopped believing in narratives about belonging and home and love that transcend circumstances. Her silence is different from Luna's, not protective withdrawal but active resistance to a world that has proven unworthy of her wisdom and imagination. I remain a social worker, still navigating the spaces between Monterey's beautiful facade and its hidden struggles, but now with complete understanding of how power operates in coastal communities, how charity can coexist with cruelty, how systems designed to protect children can be weaponized to destroy families that challenge comfortable assumptions. The Maria Santos Foster Youth Scholarship Fund continues to operate, providing financial support for foster children pursuing higher education. The irony persists. Monterey celebrates its commitment to supporting foster youth, while the foster children who inspired the program remain separated from the only stable home they had known, their talents and dreams systematically diminished by the same community that funds their abstract advancement. Mayor Foster won re-election, her platform emphasizing inclusive community development and support for vulnerable families. She has never contacted me directly since the children were removed, though her office occasionally forwards information about foster care policy initiatives that she supports in principle but lacks the political will to implement meaningfully. Dr. Pemberton continues to serve on multiple boards, his influence in child welfare decisions undiminished by the evidence of bias and systematic exclusion that destroyed our family. His nephew and sister-in-law remain licensed foster parents, their care of my children used as evidence of their commitment to child welfare rather than recognition of the conflict of interest that enabled our family's destruction. But this story is not ending with resignation or defeat. It is ending with a call to witness, an invitation to recognize how power operates in communities across America, how exclusion disguises itself as protection, how systems designed to serve children can be manipulated to serve the comfort and assumptions of adults who prefer their charity work to remain convenient and distant. Diego, Luna, and Isabella deserve better than what Monterey offered them. They deserve to exist fully in their community, to have their talents recognized, their voices heard, their dreams supported by adults who saw them as complete human beings rather than charity cases or social problems. They deserve to attend community events without being questioned about their worthiness to exist in those spaces. They deserved adults who would fight for their inclusion rather than orchestrate their exclusion. They deserved a system that would protect their family rather than destroy it when that family challenged comfortable assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. Every community has children like Diego, Luna, and Isabella, young people with talents and dreams and perspectives that could enrich everyone's understanding of what it means to belong, what it means to support each other, what it means to create inclusive spaces where all children can thrive. But every community also has power structures like the ones that destroyed our family, networks of influence and assumption that operate to maintain comfortable hierarchies that resist challenges to establish social orders, that prefer charity to justice and good intentions to meaningful change. The question is not whether these dynamics exist in your community, they do. The question is whether you will recognize them, whether you will challenge them, whether you will stand with families like ours when inclusion becomes inconvenient for people who hold power. Because somewhere in your community, there is a foster child with artistic talent that deserves recognition. There is a young person with knowledge and passion that could teach others about the natural world. There is a child writing stories about belonging who needs adults to prove that such stories can come true. And somewhere in your community, there are adults who would prefer those children to remain invisible, who would orchestrate their exclusion when their visibility becomes uncomfortable, who would destroy families that dare to challenge assumptions about who deserves full membership in community life. The choice is yours, to be complicit in systems that prioritize comfort over justice, or to be the adult who stands with children who need advocates, who fights for inclusion even when inclusion is inconvenient, who recognizes that true community investment means valuing all children, not just the ones who are easy to love from a distance. Diego, Luna, and Isabella are still out there, still deserving of homes where they can thrive, still carrying gifts that could enrich any community willing to see them fully. They are waiting for adults who will choose love over comfort, justice over convenience, inclusion over the maintenance of systems that serve power rather than children. They are waiting for you to decide whether their stories will end with continued exclusion or with the kind of radical inclusion that transforms communities into places where all children, regardless of their circumstances, their backgrounds, or their challenge to comfortable assumptions, can know that they belong, that they are valued, that they are home. The gala ended months ago, but the choice it represented continues every day, in every community, in every moment when we decide whether to expand our definition of who deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be included in the spaces we create for celebrating what's best about the places we call home. What will you choose?